Hello everyone. Thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about CSA and what that means for companies and drivers in general. Before we do that though, I'd like to give you a little introduction about myself. My name is Mike Holke. I'm the owner of Safety First Consulting. I have been in the trucking industry for roughly 25 years. The last 12 years to 13 years, somewhere in there, I've been in the safety risk management side of the business. I've worked for various companies as a safety manager, a director of risk management, and a vice president of risk management for a fleet of roughly 300 trucks. I am a certified director of safety through the North American Transportation Management Institute, and I also have a Bachelor of Science degree in business management. With that said, I've seen pretty much everything that you can see in the world of safety in the trucking industry. And I'd like to spread that knowledge and understanding of the regulations to my clients and their drivers. And that's the reason we are doing this presentation. So with that said, we'll move on and get started. I hope I can answer all your questions. And if not, feel free to reach out to us. So if you're not sure what CSA is, this is a governmental program. It stands for Compliance, Safety, and Accountability. When this program was implemented in 2010, prior to that, a driver would get pulled over into a scale and be issued a violation, and it would just go on the company's record. Well, in 2010, when they implemented this program, it changed everything, and it changed really the industry and how people look at safety, and especially how DOT looks at safety. It's a program that closely monitors and evaluates the safety and compliance records of motor carriers and their drivers. Basically, this program gives the DOT, the FMCSA, data that enables them to take action against carriers and drivers that have safety problems and try to get them to improve. In addition, they can now track safety performance of the drivers and carriers and are now holding both more accountable for their safety performance. This program does have a scoring system with it that gives both companies and drivers points on their record, and we'll go into further detail about the scoring during this presentation. So why does this program matter? Well, unsafe carriers can have their operating authority revoked because of high CSA scores. If you're not familiar with how the FMCSA operates, they issue every carrier a safety rating. You're either satisfactory, conditional, or unsatisfactory. If you're ever audited because you're not performing well within this program, your safety rating can not only be lowered, but if you get put in unsatisfactory, you have 60 days to submit a safety management plan addressing the issues they find in their audit. If you do not submit a safety management plan or if they deny your plan, then after the 60th day, they will revoke your operating authority, which means you won't have any trucks on the road. You cannot legally operate within the laws. In addition to that, many brokers look at their safety ratings, and if you're in conditional, a lot of brokers won't use you. Like C.H. Robinson is a big one in the industry. They'll request information on why you're in conditional and what you're doing about it. And if you don't satisfy what their expectations are, then they may not use you. And I've seen a lot of carriers get hurt by that, by not being able to haul the freight they haul or are able to haul, because C.H. Robinson or some of these bigger brokers won't use them. So then they have to go to other brokers who don't pay as well. So it actually hurts their bottom line. Along with that, I used to work in the auto haul industry, and we hauled new vehicles from manufacturers to dealerships. And every one of the manufacturers, whether it's Ford, Toyota, Chrysler, Volkswagen, they all monitor these scores. And if you're not performing, they're going to bring you into their office and ask why and potentially not use you. In addition to that, insurance companies are monitoring this information, and they use this information to base carriers' insurance rates. So obviously, if you're in conditional and your safety scores aren't good within this program, then they can raise your rates partly based on those safety scores and that performance. Along with this, DOT has access to every company's CSA scores at the push of a button. So when you as a driver are pulling into a scale, they're looking up your DOT number and they are seeing what your company's scores are. And within their system, it's going to tell them whether they should inspect you or not. They use the information within this program to target carriers and drivers that are deemed unsafe. Along with this, drivers are now ranked amongst other drivers within this program. I was actually at a DOT audit down in Southern Ohio, and their officer said, "Hey, did you know that 3 of your drivers are in the bottom 98th percentile of all drivers within this program?" Meaning that they were only better than 2% of the drivers ranked in this program. So they are tracking you as drivers. They're tracking your individual safety performance as well. And because of that, carriers are now scrutinizing those records for drivers. So for example, when we're hiring drivers, the first thing we do is we run a motor vehicle report, and then we run a PSP report. The PSP report stands for Pre-Employment Screening Program, and that gives us all the information for the last 36 months of all your roadside inspections. We as a carrier, or me as a consultant, will advise carriers whether a driver may be, high risk, low risk, medium risk, or, no risk at all. And we base that on the MVR, their application and work history, and the PSP report, which shows every violation and accident you've had within this program. Along with that, most carriers, drivers that continue to get violations are going to be deemed unsafe, and the carrier may let them go and not allow them to work for them anymore, because the scores the drivers are getting, the violations they're getting, are going on the carrier score as well. So let's talk about how this program actually works. This is where we kind of get into the ins and outs of it, and hopefully we'll be able to give you everyone watching this, a better understanding of the program. So they collect data. They use roadside inspections, audits, and crash reports to collect data. They break that data down into 7 different categories that they call the 7 basics. They then measure that data. So a roadside violation will have points associated with it. So they're adding up these points and then enter it into this program, and then they evaluate it at the end of every month to determine which carriers and drivers are performing unsafely. That's called a peer comparison. They take a carrier, let's say you have 20 trucks, and they lump you in with 1,000 or 1,500 other carriers with 20 trucks throughout the country, and all carriers will travel roughly the same miles as you, and then they evaluate you and rank you against your peers, and that's when they determine whether or not you're due for an intervention or audit. This is called the safety measurement system, and we'll talk more about all of this here in the next few slides. So I just mentioned the 7 basics of this program. The basics, or the categories, they're called the behavior analysis safety improvement categories. They are unsafe driving, hours of service, driver fitness, controlled substance, vehicle maintenance, hazardous materials, and crash indicator. So anytime a driver is issued a violation, that violation is going to fall into one of these 7 categories. So the unsafe driving basic. Any violation that involves operating a commercial motor vehicle in a dangerous or careless manner. So anytime a driver is speeding, reckless driving, improper lane changes, texting or using a handheld cell phone while driving, not wearing a seatbelt, following too close, being in the left lane for too long. I see that a lot. Any of those, basically anytime you break a law while you're driving down the road, it's going to fall into the unsafe driving category. That's the basic. The next one is hours of service. Obviously, this is pretty self-explanatory. Anything to do with the driver's hours. So if you have a violation of the 11-hour rule, 14-hour rule, 30-minute break rule, any of those you get a violation for will fall under the hours of service, not including your bill lading, unit numbers, signatures, if you falsify a log, if you misuse personal conveyance, which I see a lot of people do, that's all going to fall under hours of service. Another big one I see a lot of carriers get in trouble for, or drivers for that matter, is not having your ELD mounted in a fixed location. You're required to be mounted. Not having 7 days of blank logs with you. Failing to have an instruction sheet that shows DOT how to operate your ELD. I see a lot of those type of violations as well. The next category is driver fitness. This has nothing to do with, how your BMI is or how fast you can run a mile or anything like that. It has everything to do with ensuring that you're trained properly, that you have a valid medical card, that you have a valid driver's license, that you don't have the wrong license type, that you've self-certified your medical card with your state, those type of things, the legalities of you being able to legally drive that truck, that commercial motor vehicle, I should say. Controlled substance, anything to do with drugs or alcohol related offenses. If you get pulled over and you have alcohol in your system, this is going to kind of be a double whammy because you're going to get a violation and you're probably going to lose your job with your current carrier. And most carriers that see that on your record are probably not going to hire you. So, anything to do with drugs and alcohol is a major red flag, and obviously you want to avoid those type of things. Vehicle maintenance, any improper, inadequate maintenance or cargo securement. So defective brakes, defective lights, failing to make required repairs, suspension defects, oil and grease leaks, no proof of annual inspection. If your cargo shifts and they inspect you and your cargo is, falls out the door when they open the door, you're going to get a violation. Basically, if it's on the truck, it's got to work, and it's got to work properly at the time of inspection. The next one is hazardous materials. Pretty self-explanatory. Anything related to hazardous materials. So if a driver puts the wrong placard on the truck and they get pulled over and inspected, and they could get a violation for that. I've also seen where drivers have put not taken off a placard and they're going down the road empty. That also is a violation. Smoking, within a hazardous material load is a violation. Anytime you break the hazardous material regulations, you'll get a violation and it'll fall under hazardous materials. So the next category is the crash indicator, and this is any DOT reportable accident using relevant local, county, and state reported crash data. Under the FMCSA regulations within this program, a recordable crash is defined as any accident that results in a fatality, anytime there's an accident and there's an injury requiring immediate medical treatment away from the scene. So if someone's injured and they're taken away in the ambulance, DOT recordable. And along with that, if there's a vehicle being towed because the vehicle is disabled, that is also a DOT recordable accident. Now, with that said, there are some flaws within this section of the regulations, which I'm sure a lot of you may or may not know. For example, if a commercial motor vehicle driver is stopped at a red light and someone is texting and driving and they run into them in the rear of them, and that vehicle is towed and or that person is injured and taken away to the hospital, that is automatically a DOT recordable accident. Now, they have changed some of the regulations with this over the last couple of years where you can do what you call a data queue and try to get that removed. So they're working on that. But under this definition, if you're in an accident and any of these three things happen, it is automatically a DOT recordable accident that's going on the company record for 2 years and the driver record for 5. So now that we understand the 7 basics, the 7 different categories that every violation gets lumped into, let's talk about the scoring. And this is, again, very important to understand. So each violation has what they call severity weight, and it's based on how likely the violation is to cause an accident. So for example, if you're speeding down the road and that's a very unsafe act, so that violation is going to have more points associated with it than, let's say, unlawful parking or a light being out on your trailer. So basically the way to look at the severity weighting is the higher likelihood or the likelihood that this violation will cause an accident, the higher the points are going to be. Or the unsafer the act, the higher the points are going to be. And then they also have what they call the time weight. So every violation is what they call time weighted, which means points are higher for more recent violations, and as they age, the points lower. And we'll talk about that in more detail here in the next couple slides. If you're ever put out of service, those points are even higher. They have what they call a 2-point kicker for that. And then violations stay on a driver's record for 36 months and a carrier's record for 24 months. Again, CSA, compliance, safety, and accountability, they understand that the carriers cannot be in the truck with that driver every day, so the drivers are being held more accountable. Therefore, their time frame is longer than the actual carriers. So let's talk about the time-weighted program. So, and this may be a little confusing to you at first, but you'll understand it much better on the next slide. So for the carrier, if the violation took place within the 1 to 6 months, the time weight is 3. As the violation ages, the time weight drops. So on the 7th to the 12th month, the time weight goes down to 2. On the 13th to 24th month, the time weight is 1. And after the 24th month, it drops off the carrier's record. For the drivers, it's pretty much the same, 3, 2, 1, except your time frame is longer. So if you're a driver gets a violation today, for the first 12 months, the time weight is going to be 3. On the 13th to 24th month, the time weight then drops down to 2, and then the 25th to 36th month, the time weight is 1. After the 36th month, it falls off your record. In the next slide, we'll kind of put this together because I know it's a little confusing on how this is worded. So here's an example of how the scoring would work. So drivers issued a violation today for 30-minute break rule, which would fall under the hours of service basic. The severity weight is 7, and because it took place today, the time weight is 3. Therefore, you multiply 7 by 3, so your total value or total points for that violation is going to be 21. As that violation ages, so after the 6th month and before the 12th month, the time weight would drop down to 2. So then your severity weight of 7 right here and your time weight of 2 now lowers your score, your total points to 14th. After the 12th month and before the 24th month, your time weight would drop down to 1 and your severity weight would stay 7, so your total points would be 7. On the 25th month, it would fall off completely, and this is for the carrier. Down here you can see the drivers, the same thing. The first 12 months, the time weight's going to be 3, so you would be 21. The 13th to 24th month, your time weight drops down to 2, so your total score goes to 14. And then the 24 to the 36th month, your time weight goes to 1, which makes your total score 7. After the 36th month, it would fall off your record completely. So here's another scoring example, because if you remember, I talked about an out-of-service violation being a 2-point kicker. So, excuse me. So same violation, driver's 30-minute break rule, and the severity weight is 7. And just so you know, I don't know if the severity weight is actually 7 on that. I just threw some numbers in here to give everyone a general idea. So same violation, severity weight of 7, time weight of 3 because it happened today. But now, because this violation became an out of service, you have the 2-point kicker. So you take the severity weight of 7 plus the 2-point kicker, and you multiply that by 3, the time weight. Now that same violation is worth 27 points compared to 21, just because you're placed out of service. So you can see how an out of service order really can increase your score by a lot, not only for the driver, but for the carrier as well. And I've seen where these out of service violations really hurt carriers and raise their scores quite a bit. And then again, as it ages, this would drop down to 2 and then down to 1, and then it would fall off the record. So now that we talked about the scoring and the basics, kind of the ins and outs of this program, I want to talk about the threshold for carriers. And this is, again, where they're evaluating carriers to their peers. So each basic has set thresholds that carriers must meet. And if they don't, then they're put on alert status. This means you're not performing well against your peers. So you're in alert and they're watching you. And if you get in alert status, you could be on the list to be audited. The audits or interventions, as I call them again, are usually focused and can be conducted off-site, remotely, or conducted on-site. A focused audit is one that focuses only on the areas that you're not performing in. So in other words, let's say a carrier is not performing well on hours of service and they're in alert status. The FMCSA could come in and say, hey, you're on our list to be audited. We're going to do an off-site audit, and they're going to request a bunch of information for the hours of service category that they're in alert status for. If you're in alert status in several categories, they're probably going to come in and do a focused audit and look into everything in your entire safety programs. Along with this, when you're in alert status, you as drivers when you're going through a scale, they can see that your company is in alert status, and more than likely they're going to pull you over and do an inspection on you because your company is not within those thresholds. So those thresholds are, for the unsafe driving, is 65%. The crash indicator is 65%. The hours of service is 65%. Vehicle maintenance is 80%. Controlled substances 80%. Hazardous materials is 80%. And driver fitness is 80%. And I'll talk more about these in the next slide here, but you want to be below those thresholds. If you're not below those thresholds, then you're on the list you're in alert status and on the list to be audited. And this is what that looks like. So this was a company, and this is what it looks like in the safety measurement system. You can see right here. And here's your categories: unsafe driving, crash indicator, hours of service, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance, hazardous materials, driver fitness. You can see these triangles with the little exclamation point. That signifies that this carrier is in alert status. And you can see alert status, triangles, and you can see down here their measure, they're at 75%. So in unsafe driving, they're 10% above the threshold. So what this means is that 75% of the carriers that they're lumped in with, their peer group, is better than them in this category. You can see here the crash indicator. They're in the 95 percentile. Hours of service, again, 93 percentile. That means that they're only better than 7% of the carriers they're lumped in with. And you can see here, vehicle maintenance, 92 percentile. Again, they're only better than 8% of the carriers they're lumped in with. So they aren't in alert status in all these categories, which is not good, to say the least. So when a carrier is in alert status, like the slide I just showed you, in the SMS program, it may look like this from an officer's perspective. They actually have a red light, green light, yellow light on the carrier's dashboard, and red obviously means inspect. Yellow means the carrier, may have one alert, maybe some issues, and it's up to the officer if they're going to inspect them. Green means the carrier doesn't have any alerts, and they can let them go. But again, red means you are on the list to be inspected. Pretty much 100% of the time. And also, just because you're green doesn't mean that they won't inspect you. It just means that you don't have a lot of issues. So if a driver, is speeding through the scale, they're probably going to pull him over and inspect him, even if they're green. So now we're going to talk about getting actual violations. So if you get a warning, a lot of times I see this happen a lot, and it's written on an inspection report. It is no different than getting a violation. Warnings count against you just like a regular violation. And I've seen too many times where an officer will give a driver a warning and say, oh, well, I'll just give you a warning for it. And the driver will be like, oh, okay, thanks. I appreciate that. The officer's doing that because he doesn't want to argue with the driver. That warning carries just as many points as a violation. So he's really not doing you any favors. The points you get on a roadside inspection do not count on your MVR. So remember, these are two different programs. So as a driver, you can get a speeding ticket from a local police officer, and it will go on your MVR, but may not go on your CSA, because in general, the CSA program is the violations are issued by officers that are DOT qualified to inspect your vehicle. In addition, you can also get a roadside inspection and a violation for speeding that won't show up on your MVR. So they're two different programs, and they're not intermingled with one another. Again, drivers are ranked with other drivers. They're grading drivers just like they are carriers. Drivers and or carriers can be deemed an imminent hazard based on the violations on their CSA record and have their CDL license revoked. So basically, and I've seen articles on this where this happens quite a bit. A driver will have all these violations on their record. The carrier will get audited, and then they'll look into this driver's history. And a lot of times they'll send the drivers fines in the mail after the fact. And then B, if the driver's performance is that bad, they can actually revoke your CDL license as a driver. Along with that, when you do get a violation, they can be disputed. This is called data queued. In some cases, they can be overturned and get taken off of your record. So I've tried to put some questions in here as well, because I'm sure many of you watching this will have some questions. So I've tried to list some questions on things I've heard when I've done this training live, which obviously, with COVID and many carriers not being able to get drivers into their offices anymore, it's hard to do training face to face. So I try to put some of those questions that have been asked into this, and hopefully they'll answer some of your questions. So the first one is, do my roadside violations go on my MVR? No, and we just talked about that. These are two separate programs. However, if you're not performing within the CSA program, you could be declared an imminent hazard, and your CDL license could be revoked by the FMCSA. If I get a speeding ticket and fight it in court, will it also be overturned on my CSA report? The answer is maybe. Remember, they're two different programs, and the court does not recognize anything about CSA. So you would have to go to court, you'd have to win it in court, and data queue the violation and request that it be overturned. When you do data queue the violation, this is how it works. If in court it's totally dismissed, the violation will be removed from CSA. If you're convicted of a different charge, the severity is reduced to 1 and shows in CSA that you're convicted of another charge. If you're convicted or dismissed with a fine, the violation will not change in CSA. So remember, two different programs. If you go to court and you fight something, you then have to go into data queue to the FMCSA portal, the SMS site, and data queue that violation to try to get it removed. Can I be fined for a CSA violation even if I'm not getting a ticket that goes on my MVR? The answer to that is absolutely. I've seen this happen. It's rare that it does happen, but I have seen it happen. And in general, it happens because the driver is not very compliant with the officer. So the driver's arguing with him, they're going back and forth, he's just being, non-compliant with the officer. The officer's going to give him a violation, and then he sent him a ticket in the mail. So absolutely you can be fined for CSA. If I as a driver am not performing well within this program, what happens? Well, first you will be sent a warning letter from the FMCSA. If you continue to have violations, you may be fined and be considered an imminent hazard and have your CDL license revoked. Again, this is an extreme case, but it does happen. If my company isn't performing, what happens? Well, it all depends on how bad they're not performing. In general, they'll receive a warning letter, and they could be investigated or audited as well. What type of investigations does the FMCSA conduct? Off-site, where they request certain items and documentations. On-site focused interventions, where they focus on specific areas that the company is struggling in. So if you're struggling in, let's say, accidents and maintenance, they're going to focus on those two areas. On-site comprehensive is where they review the entire safety operations of the carrier. So that slide I showed you a few back where the carrier was in alert status in 4 categories, that carrier actually went through an on-site comprehensive audit where they went through their entire safety programs. Can I be issued more than one violation during a roadside inspection? Yes. For example, if you do not take a 30-minute break for 7 days in a row, they can actually issue a violation for each day. If you have several different maintenance violations found during one stop, they can issue a violation for everything they find. Now, generally, if let's say they inspect you and you have 3 marker lights on your trailer, generally they'll issue you 1 violation for the marker light. But they could, for every violation they find, they can issue a violation. If I'm involved in an accident where I'm not at fault, can I get that removed from my record? The simple answer is yes. We talked about that. However, there are only certain circumstances that will overturn an accident, and those are hard to get by as well. What if I inspect my truck in the morning and everything is fine, but 8 hours later I pull into a scale and they find something wrong, like a light is out? At the end of the day, if it's not working at the time you're inspected, then you're going to get a violation. You got to remember, everything, especially when it comes to maintenance, everything must work and work at the time of the inspection. Same thing for everything else. I mean, if your ELD is not mounted, you can get a violation. So it's all based on at the time of inspection. It doesn't matter if it was working fine before you left on your trip. It's all based on what they find during that inspection. So tips to avoid violations. It's pretty simple. Comply with all the regulations. Obey the rules of the road. Obey the laws. Do not speed. This is a big one. Every carrier I go into, a majority of their issues in unsafe driving is because drivers are speeding. When you're speeding, it's easy to get pulled over for speeding and then for them to inspect you and find more violations. Plus, and I just want to throw this in there, I see drivers speeding down the road every day. And I can tell you, for example, going through a construction zone on the Ohio Turnpike. I'm doing the speed limit and a semi flies by me doing 10 over the speed limit. He's risking lives, first of all. But secondly, when we get out of that construction zone and I get back up to my normal speed, I normally pass that driver, 10, 15 minutes later down the road. So you don't make up any time speeding. In fact, more than likely, you're going to lose anytime you do make up somewhere en route, whether fueling, eating, you go to the bathroom, when you take your 30-minute break, you get stuck in traffic, whatever the case, you're not going to make up any time speeding. All you're doing is putting your life, other people's lives at risk for speeding. And then secondly, you're making it easy to get pulled over, for an officer to inspect you and find more violations that go on your record and the company's record. So drive in accordance to the conditions. Always do your pre-trip and post-trip inspections and make required repairs when necessary. I always tell everyone, do walk-around inspections every time you stop. Listen for air leaks, thump your tires, check your lights, look for oil leaks, etc., etc. Make sure your equipment is up to snuff and working properly. Drive defensively, avoid distractions, stay alert, be well rested, and always scan the roadways to try to anticipate the unexpected. So in closing, CSA affects everything a carrier does, from the safety ratings to insurance costs. It affects the efficiency of the company and the drivers. No one wants to spend an hour alongside the road doing a level 1 inspection. You're losing time, and especially if your scores are high and they're doing those inspections because of that. No one wants to lose time down the road. No one makes money sitting. High scores equal DOT audits. Fines and safety ratings can be decreased, or worse, they can be revoked. CSA affects whether your company drivers will be pulled into scales or not. It affects drivers and their being ranked against others. So the more points that the driver has, the higher the risk the driver presents. And I talked about this earlier. The first thing we do is run an MVR from a safety perspective anyway. We run the MVR, we look at the PSP report, and we make a decision. We combine that with the application, and we look at the driver's work history, and they have a lot of violations on their MVR and a lot of violations on their PSP, and we see on their application that they have had a bunch of jobs over the last 12, 14 months. Those are red flags, and a lot of times if those violations on their PSP and MVR are bad, the insurance company won't hire them. So if you're a driver watching this, keep that in mind, that this stuff is counting against you, and many insurance companies and many carriers have safety programs in place that they won't hire you because of those things. So with that said, I hope everyone learned something out of this presentation today. If you have questions, you can feel free to go to our website and hit the contact me page. I appreciate everyone taking the time to review this and watch this, and thank you very much. Have a safe day.